one of the things that my mom always told me, we had this kind of goodbye sequence or goodbye ritual.
Yeah.
When I would leave the house, and she would tell me, Amanda, you always, I am smart, I am beautiful, I am strong, and no one can take that away from me. And that's something my mom always told me, and I would have to repeat those words myself. And we even had like hand gestures. So for smart, we'd be like, I'm smart. So pointing to, our brain, I am strong, doing like the whole fist muscle thing. And then I am beautiful. So then you do the ASL sign for beautiful. And then you would be like shaking your hand like no, and no one can take that away from me. So,
oh my gosh, I love that.
yeah. So like I said, just reading that kind of reminded me of that moment. I think, as women and as educators, especially during that time, I think sometimes we need to kind of give ourselves that break and not be so hard on ourselves. And that's exactly what you did for yourself, is like being like, hey, this is hard for everybody, but we're going to get through it. We're going to, see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. And that can bring on a whole different tangent. And I remember I was in my living room because everything was virtual at that time. And, I love spin classes. Like when I can take them, I'm going to take them because it's a good way to just honestly just like let off some steam. But the trainer who I was working with, she's one of my favorite trainers I've ever trained with. And, she said, I want everybody to say these 3 words. And honestly, I felt super uncomfortable because it's awkward because I think, and I think women especially, we kind of get this imposter syndrome. Like, we call ourselves beautiful, we call ourselves smart, and it's like we don't really truly feel that way. And, that's something I'm still struggling with even as a grown adult, is being able to say, no, it's okay to feel beautiful. It's okay to feel smart. It's okay to feel accomplished and professional in your opinion and be validated in that. And that's a reminder daily that I have to give myself, like, no, it's okay. Like, give yourself a break. We don't have to be perfect all the time. And I think even as music educators, we are so hard on ourselves because we're always finding things to get better, to be better, to improve upon every day. And I think sometimes we lose the praise aspect of things, not being able to compliment, like, hey, this is going really, really well. I remember, kind of going off on another tangent here, but I remember going into my first couple years of teaching, I've had a lot of strong women in my life who, they would ask you to do something and it would get done the first time. And if it didn't get done the first time, you knew there were some consequences of some kind. And, my mom is definitely one of those strong women who taught me, like, hey, if you're going to do something right, make sure you do it the first time. And let's make sure that you do it right all the time. And, don't be sloppy with your work, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I always grew up with, these very high expectations. I want to make sure I do it right. I want to make sure I do it well. And I think sometimes that was interpreted in a negative way because I remember being told my first couple years of teaching, hey, be careful of the tone of your voice, or be careful of raising your voice because it can sound kind of witchy, if you will.
Yeah.
And while that was not my intention, that was the tone and that was the perception I was giving off. And when I moved to 4 Points, my head director, who has been a fabulous mentor, shout out to Jessica Gonzalez, she made it very clear to me my first year at 4 Points that the culture was top priority over everything else. And I didn't have a grasp on that. I didn't know what it meant to build a relationship with kids. And, even with my SASE leadership training, we preached building relationships, but I just didn't know how to do that. And it took me a long time to be able to find kind of that positive spin and being able to compliment and being able to praise kids for what they're doing. It like got to the point where I had to put sticky notes in my binder and say, make sure you compliment 2 kids after each rep for something that they're doing, whether it was sitting up or whether it was finishing the phrase correctly or whether it was using more air, even if it maybe wasn't the best sound, just doing something to compliment the kids because, something that we preach at SASE, what gets rewarded will get repeated. And so the more that I started rewarding some of that behavior, the more I started to see the culture shift. And, now in my classes, I've been at 4 Points now for 5 years. Now, my classes, I work really hard to make it the most positive environment. And, I'm not talking like happy go lucky all the time, but positive in that there's a mutual respect between my students and myself where we still get the work done. There's still higher expectations, but we can have fun while doing it. It shouldn't just be business all the time. And, now that I've really learned how to establish those relationships with my students, if I get onto them about something, I'm not being witchy. I'm saying, hey, you're not meeting these expectations. You're not doing this job. And here's how we can make it better. And, I think working and building on that mutual respect has just made such a huge, huge difference in my classroom.